Today's video is dedicated to my dad, who introduced me to storytelling and helped me fall in love with it. Horror was always our favorite genre to discuss and watch, and he was always excited to read my silly stories I would come up with. Hope you enjoy this one, Dad. And don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I have way too much to live for now.
Welcome to Amber's Midnight Terrors, where fear finds you when you least expect it. Every night, I bring you short, haunting tales. Tonight's story is called Distant Voices. So many voices bombard us throughout the day. Some meant to guide us, others dim reminders of what has been lost.
Willowbrook, a small town with cookie-cutter houses and predictable lives. 13-year-old Amy hated the monotony. She often snuck out to the local cemetery with her friends, hoping to find a thrill. Urban legend told of a creature that haunted the grounds, stalking the cemetery on the same night every year, hunting its prey. Amy didn't believe any of it. She'd been in the cemetery last year on the rumored night, and nothing had happened. Bored teenagers always hung out there, but none of them had ever gone missing. In fact, the cemetery had become one of her favorite places in the last month. Sometimes she'd even curl up beside a headstone to sleep. It was always the same headstone. Shivers ran down her spine as she looked at the surrounding headstones. A woman stood among them, her head bent down as if weeping. Something about her felt familiar. An owl hooted nearby, and Amy jumped. When she looked back at the tombstone, the woman was gone. Climbing back through her window, the light flicking on in her room momentarily blinded Amy. Her mom stood by the door, hands on her hips. Guilt washed over her. Things had been rough since her father had died a month ago. Her mom had become a ghost of sorts. Physically there, but emotionally distant. Someone had to keep their life going. So she shut down and focused on keeping the bills paid. Amy had been so close to her father. When he died, her world stopped. Being at home made it impossible to escape the memories, so she found any excuse to leave. It drove her mom crazy, but she didn't do much to stop it. Her dad's death had cast a dark shadow over their entire home. That's why Amy spent most nights in the cemetery, talking to her dad, filling him in on the things he was missing in her life. She'd curl up beside the tombstone, pretending it was her dad's arms around her, instead of cold, stiff stone. The next night, she went back. The woman was there again, weeping over the same gravestone. Amy wanted to approach her, but something held her back. Amy woke up, her neck sore from resting against the tombstone. Strange, thick fog surrounded her, clouding her vision. Mournful moans echoed in the air, leaving an eerie feeling behind. The grieving woman glided towards her, a black cloak billowing in the wind.
Go home, Amy.
Her dad's voice, desperate, filled with panic, echoed through the fog. Tears formed in Amy's eyes as she searched the graveyard for him. Shadowy, translucent figures glided toward her, their movements slow, accompanied by angry yells. Amy stood, confused and desperate to hear her dad's voice again.
No. Dad, please. Where are you? Come back.
Amy screamed into the wind. The grieving woman's white eyes locked onto her, reading her every thought. Amy froze, then bolted toward her father's tombstone. But it was gone. The thick fog disoriented her, and she stumbled as hands roughly guided her back toward it. Amy jolted awake, the bright sun blinding her. The graveyard looked the same as it did every morning. There was no grieving woman. Legs trembling, she slowly stood up, backing away from her father's grave. The feeling of being followed wouldn't leave her as she walked out of the cemetery.
Amy. Amy. Come find me, please.
Her dad's voice came from her teacher's mouth. Fear seeped into her. Every class she had today, her dad's voice followed her. Every mirror she looked into, she saw his image. She managed to stay away from the cemetery for 2 days, but his voice haunted her dreams, calling her back to the graveyard. After the third nightmare, she couldn't take it anymore. She snuck out again, returning to the cemetery. The grieving woman stood by the same gravestone, her white eyes following Amy's every move.
Dad, please tell me. What is going on?
Amy sobbed, falling to her knees in front of the grave. She curled up beside the tombstone once more. Eventually, her tears slowed, and she fell. Desperate wails woke her, the thick white fog swirling back around her.
Amy, I told you, go home.
Her dad's voice yelled at her. His angry face stabbed Amy's gut. He had always been calm, down to earth. She had never seen him so angry. The black cloak swayed as the grieving woman drew nearer.
Daddy, I don't understand. We need you. Please come back to us.
Amy pleaded, tears pouring down her face. Anguish growls filled the silence. She wanted so badly to reach out to him, but there was nothing to hold. His form was just smoke, shifting away as soon as she stretched out her arms.
She has marked you. You must go home.
Her dad's voice pierced through her, pointing toward the woman, who was now close enough to touch her. Finally, Amy understood who the woman was. She was death. Its cold, empty tendrils reaching for her. Amy begged, her sobs breaking up her words. She couldn't bear returning to that empty house, to a mother who had given up the day they buried her father. A house full of memories that only haunted her. Her legs gave way, and she allowed herself to feel the pain she had buried. Her dad's hands solidified, pushing her back against the tombstone. Her head exploded with pain as it struck the hard stone. Amy woke again, the sun blinding her. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and the grieving woman stood there, her pale white eyes lingering on Amy's face. Amy walked home, her steps slow, haunted by whispers and shadows that followed her. Death had been waiting for her to choose her fate. Amy spent the night with her mom, cooking her dad's favorite recipe, playing his favorite games, and making sure her mom knew how much she loved her. Tear stains covered the page as she folded the letter, setting it on her pillow. Opening the window, she returned to the cemetery. The grieving woman watched as Amy set up a blanket at her father's grave. Numbness spread through her limbs as she reached for the prescription bottle. Whispers and shadowy figures surrounded her. She closed her eyes, hoping her dad would come to her again, but when she opened them, doubt crept in.
Is this really the answer?
Amy asked herself, her hands trembling as she tried to open the bottle. The fog thickened, swirling around her as sirens wailed in the distance. She didn't know if they were meant for her. The grieving woman appeared, grabbing her shoulder. Amy gasped as the cold hand pressed down on her. The weight of her decision hung in the air, the whispers growing louder. The woman's white eyes bore into Amy as though searching her soul. Amy's hand trembled, the bottle falling from her grasp as she looked into the woman's face.
Why?
She whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks.
Because it's not your time.
The woman's voice was soft, yet firm, carrying the weight of countless lost souls. The shadows circled closer, the fog swirling faster, but the woman's grip tightened, steadying Amy.
Go home,
she whispered again, almost pleading. Amy's chest tightened, her dad's voice calling her in the distance. She closed her eyes, gripping the blanket tightly as warmth filled her chest. When she opened them again, the woman was gone. When the fog had lifted, the world around her was still, and Amy stood, uncertain but resolute. She wasn't done yet. Slowly, she turned her back on the cemetery and made her way home. It was also the last night she ever went. Some of my favorite horror stories don't end happily. Sometimes, though, a small ray of hope is necessary and needed. Horror isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's about continuing on with our lives when everything seems lost. The worst monsters we face are the ones our minds create. Death is easy for those who pass. It's the living who remain haunted, hoping for just a little more time, and sometimes hearing the voices of those they've lost.
Thank you for joining me on Amber's Midnight Terrors. Are you brave enough to subscribe for your nightly dose of fear? If tonight's tale sent chills down your spine, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments. Good night and sleep well, if you can.